3 weeks ago, I discovered that my teenage daughter Sophie had developed romantic feelings for Tom, Amy's 17-year-old son. The possibility that they might be half-siblings who could accidentally commit incest drove me to investigate suspicions I had been harboring for years about my husband's relationship with his childhood friend. Yesterday, I confronted both Luke and Amy together about whether they had ever crossed the line sexually and whether Luke was the biological father of Amy's children. Their responses were so perfectly rehearsed and defensively emotional that I became more convinced than ever that they were hiding a massive secret that could destroy both our family. Amy absolutely refused to allow DNA testing of her children, becoming furious at the suggestion and telling me in explicit terms to leave her family alone. Luke agreed to DNA testing for himself, but pointed out that Amy's refusal made the tests meaningless, since we need her children's samples for comparison. The confrontation ended with Amy spending the night at Luke's request to perform damage control, while I lay awake, wondering whether my husband was comforting his secret baby mama or planning their next moves and covering up their affair. My mother-in-law, Kat, later revealed that she has harbored the same suspicions for years and has always wondered whether Amy's children were actually her biological grandchildren. She said she has treated them as family partly because she suspected Luke might be their father. The most terrifying aspect of this situation is that if my suspicions are correct, Sophie and Tom are half-siblings who have been developing romantic feelings for each other without knowing they share a father. The potential for accidental incest has made me desperate for answers that everyone involved seems determined to prevent me from getting. Luke is now asking me to drop the entire investigation and trust his word that he has never been unfaithful to me. But his reaction to my questions and his willingness to spend the night comforting Amy, instead of addressing my concerns, has only strengthened my conviction that they are hiding something catastrophic. I feel like I am trapped in a nightmare where the two people I trusted most have been living a lie for over 15 years, potentially putting my daughter at risk of unknowingly committing incest with her half-brother. The fact that I cannot get definitive answers through DNA testing means I may never know the truth about my husband's relationship with Amy or the paternity of her children. But let me take you back to show you how 5 years of growing suspicions finally exploded into a confrontation that has left me questioning whether my entire marriage has been built on deception and betrayal. The suspicions that destroyed my family relationships began 5 years ago when I started noticing uncanny physical resemblances between my husband Luke and his best friend, Amy's 3 children. At first, I dismissed these observations as coincidental similarities that could be explained by the fact that Luke and Amy had grown up in the same community and shared similar ethnic backgrounds. But over time, the resemblances became impossible to ignore. Amy's eldest son, Tom, had Luke's distinctive jawline, eye shape, and facial structure. Her twins, Adam and Sophie, shared Luke's unusual hair color and texture that was completely different from Amy's appearance. Even more concerning were behavioral and personality traits that seemed to connect Luke with Amy's children in ways that went beyond normal adult-mentor relationships. Tom had inherited Luke's specific phobias and quirky habits. The twins displayed Luke's unique sense of humor and communication style. Most troubling was the discovery that Luke had been sleepwalking in the past, and that Tom, Adam, and Sophie had all exhibited the same unusual behavior pattern that was extremely rare in the general population. When I tried to discuss these observations with Luke, he dismissed my concerns as overactive imagination and suggested that I was looking for problems that did not exist in our family relationships. But I could not shake the feeling that Luke and Amy were hiding something significant about their relationship and the circumstances surrounding her children's conception and birth. The situation became urgent 3 weeks ago when I discovered that my daughter Sophie had developed romantic feelings for Tom, who might be her half-brother, if my suspicions about Luke's paternity were correct. The investigation that led to yesterday's confrontation began when I realized that allowing Sophie and Tom to pursue a romantic relationship could result in accidental incest if Luke was indeed Tom's biological father. Luke and Amy had always been unusually close friends who spent extensive time together without their respective spouses. They had grown up as neighbors and had maintained their childhood friendship throughout their adult marriages and parenting responsibilities. Amy had moved in with Luke's family when her own parents kicked her out as a teenager, creating a surrogate sibling relationship that Luke's parents had encouraged and supported. But I had always wondered whether Luke and Amy viewed each other as siblings or whether romantic feelings had developed during their adolescent years. Amy's 3 children had been born during a period when she was not in stable relationships with identifiable father figures. She had never provided clear information about who had fathered her children, always claiming that the details were private and not relevant to current family dynamics. Luke had stepped into a paternal role with Amy's children from their births, providing financial support, emotional guidance, and daily involvement in their care and development. His relationship with them was indistinguishable from his relationship with his own biological children. This pattern of involvement could be explained by Luke's generous and caring personality, but it could also indicate biological connection and parental responsibility that he was hiding from his own family. When Sophie and Tom began developing romantic feelings for each other, I realized that I needed definitive answers about their potential biological relationship before allowing them to pursue any physical or emotional intimacy. I had been collecting mental evidence of Luke's potential paternity for years, but I had never acted on my suspicions because the implications were too devastating to contemplate. The possibility that my husband had been conducting a long-term affair with his childhood friend was emotionally overwhelming. But the risk of accidental incest between Sophie and Tom forced me to confront my suspicions directly, rather than continuing to hope that my observations were coincidental and meaningless. I decided to approach Luke and Amy together, because I suspected that questioning them separately would give them opportunities to coordinate their responses and cover up any deception they might be maintaining. I wanted to observe their immediate reactions to direct questions about their relationship and Luke's potential paternity of Amy's children. I hoped that surprising them with confrontation would prevent them from preparing elaborate explanations or excuses. The decision to confront them together was also motivated by my belief that Amy would be more likely to reveal the truth if she felt cornered and unable to rely on Luke for emotional support during the conversation. I had rehearsed various approaches to the conversation, but I ultimately decided to be direct and honest about my suspicions, rather than trying to trap them with leading questions or indirect accusations. I told them that I had noticed striking physical and behavioral resemblances between Luke and Amy's children, and that these similarities had created concerns about potential biological relationships that needed to be addressed. I explained that Sophie and Tom's romantic interest in each other had made it urgent for me to understand whether they might be half-siblings who could accidentally commit incest if their relationship progressed. I asked Luke directly whether he had ever been sexually involved with Amy, and whether there was any possibility that he was the biological father of her children. The responses I received were so immediate and emotionally intense that they seemed rehearsed rather than spontaneous. Both Luke and Amy appeared to have anticipated this conversation and prepared their defensive reactions in advance. Luke seemed genuinely hurt and shocked by my accusations, but his emotional response felt calculated rather than authentic. He asked how I could suspect him of such betrayal and deception after years of marriage and commitment to our family. Amy became angry and defensive, accusing me of paranoid thinking and inappropriate interference in her family relationships. She said that my suspicions were insulting and hurtful to everyone involved, but their coordinated responses and immediate defensive strategies suggested that they had discussed this possibility before and had agreed on how to handle direct confrontation about their relationship. When I requested DNA testing to resolve the paternity questions definitively, Luke agreed to participate, but pointed out that Amy's cooperation would be necessary for meaningful results. Amy absolutely refused to allow testing of her children, becoming furious at the suggestion and demanding that I stop interfering in her family's private matters. Her refusal to allow DNA testing was particularly suspicious because innocent people would typically welcome opportunities to disprove false accusations and clear their names. The fact that Amy was willing to allow suspicions to persist, rather than providing definitive proof of Luke's innocence, suggested that she was afraid of what DNA testing might reveal. Luke's willingness to be tested while knowing that Amy would refuse seemed designed to make him appear cooperative, while ensuring that no actual testing could occur. The entire confrontation felt like a carefully orchestrated performance designed to deflect suspicion, while preventing any possibility of discovering the truth through scientific evidence. The confrontation that shattered my illusions about my marriage took place yesterday morning, after I had spent weeks building courage to ask the questions that had been haunting me for years. I had decided that protecting Sophie from potential accidental incest was more important than preserving family harmony, or avoiding uncomfortable truths. I arranged for all the children to be at school, so that Luke, Amy, and I could have a private conversation without worrying about little ears overhearing adult discussions about paternity, infidelity, and family secrets. I had practiced various approaches to this conversation, but ultimately decided that direct honesty was the only way to get authentic responses from people who might have been deceiving me for over 15 years. I began by explaining that I had been noticing striking physical and behavioral resemblances between Luke and Amy's children for several years, and that these similarities had created concerns about potential biological relationships that needed to be addressed honestly. I told them that Sophie and Tom's developing romantic interest in each other had made it urgent for me to understand whether they might be half-siblings who could accidentally commit incest if their relationship progressed without knowledge of their potential biological connection. I said that I loved both of them deeply and did not want to believe that they had been deceiving me, but that the safety and well-being of our children required me to ask difficult questions and seek definitive answers. Then I looked directly at Luke and asked whether he had ever been sexually involved with Amy, and whether there was any possibility that he was the biological father of any of her children. The silence that followed my question seemed to last forever. Both Luke and Amy stared at me with expressions that combined shock, hurt, and something that looked like fear or panic. Luke was the first to respond, and his reaction was immediate and emotionally intense. He seemed genuinely devastated that I would suspect him of such betrayal and deception. He asked how I could think such terrible things about him after years of marriage and commitment to our family. His emotional response felt authentic, but it also seemed slightly too perfect and rehearsed. He had all the right notes of hurt and shock, but something about his reaction felt calculated, rather than spontaneous. Amy's response was completely different, but equally suspicious. She became angry and defensive, rather than hurt and shocked. She accused me of paranoid thinking and inappropriate interference in her family relationships. She said that my suspicions were insulting and hurtful to everyone involved, and that I was creating problems where none existed. She demanded to know why I would think such horrible things about people who loved me and had always been loyal friends. But her anger seemed designed to intimidate me into dropping the subject, rather than to defend against false accusations. Innocent people typically respond to mistaken suspicions with confusion and eagerness to clear their names, not with hostility and demands for silence. The combination of Luke's perfect emotional performance and Amy's aggressive defensiveness made me more suspicious rather than reassured. Their responses felt coordinated and prepared rather than spontaneous and authentic. I told them that their reactions were not convincing me of their innocence, and that I needed more concrete reassurance about Luke's relationship with Amy and his potential paternity of her children. I explained that the physical and behavioral resemblances I had observed were too numerous and specific to be coincidental, and that I needed scientific evidence to disprove my suspicions. I asked whether they would be willing to participate in DNA testing that would definitively establish whether Luke was the biological father of Amy's children. Luke's response to this request was immediate agreement, which initially seemed reassuring. He said that he had nothing to hide and would be happy to prove his innocence through scientific testing. But then he pointed out that DNA testing would require Amy's cooperation and consent for testing her children, and that he could not force her to participate if she was unwilling. This response seemed designed to make Luke appear cooperative while ensuring that no actual testing could occur. He was offering to do something that he knew would be impossible without Amy's participation. Amy's reaction to the DNA testing request was explosive and definitive. She absolutely refused to allow testing of her children and became furious at the suggestion. She said that she would not subject her children to invasive procedures based on my paranoid suspicions and unfounded accusations. She accused me of trying to destroy their family relationships through false allegations and inappropriate demands. Her refusal to allow DNA testing was the most suspicious aspect of the entire confrontation. Innocent people would typically welcome opportunities to disprove false accusations and clear their names through objective scientific evidence. The fact that Amy was willing to allow suspicions to persist, rather than providing definitive proof of Luke's innocence, suggested that she was afraid of what DNA testing might reveal about her children's paternity. I told Amy that her refusal to allow testing was making me more convinced that my suspicions were correct. I pointed out that she had no legitimate reason to prevent DNA testing, unless she was afraid of the results. Amy responded by saying that she did not need to prove her children's paternity to satisfy my paranoid delusions. She said that my demands were inappropriate, and that I had no right to interfere in her family's private matters. But her hostility and defensiveness were completely inconsistent with innocence. Someone who had nothing to hide would be eager to resolve the situation through objective testing, rather than allowing suspicions to continue destroying family relationships. The confrontation continued for over an hour, with both Luke and Amy maintaining their positions that they had never been sexually involved, and that Luke was not the biological father of Amy's children. But their inability to provide convincing explanations for the physical and behavioral resemblances I had observed, combined with Amy's refusal to allow DNA testing, left me more convinced than ever that they were hiding something significant. Luke tried to address my concerns by suggesting that the resemblances I had noticed were either coincidental or the result of environmental factors rather than biological connections. He pointed out that children often develop similarities to adults they spend significant time with, and that Amy's children had been exposed to his personality and habits throughout their lives. But his explanations could not account for physical characteristics like facial structure and hair texture that are determined by genetics rather than environment. Amy tried a different approach, accusing me of letting jealousy and insecurity corrupt my perception of innocent family relationships. She suggested that I was looking for problems because I was uncomfortable with Luke's close friendship with another woman. But this accusation ignored the fact that my concerns were specifically about protecting Sophie from potential accidental incest, rather than about jealousy or marital insecurity. As the conversation progressed, both Luke and Amy began asking me to drop the investigation and trust their word that nothing inappropriate had ever occurred between them. They said that continuing to pursue these suspicions would damage family relationships and create unnecessary conflict and tension for everyone involved, especially the children. But their request for me to abandon my investigation without definitive proof of their innocence only reinforced my conviction that they were hiding something that DNA testing would reveal. The confrontation ended with no resolution and no definitive answers. Luke maintained his offer to participate in DNA testing, while knowing that Amy's refusal made such testing impossible. Amy maintained her absolute refusal to allow testing of her children while demanding that I accept their word and stop pursuing the investigation. That evening, Luke told me that he needed to spend the night with Amy to perform damage control and help her process the emotional trauma of being accused of deception and betrayal. His decision to comfort Amy rather than addressing my concerns and fears was devastating and suspicious. It seemed like he was prioritizing Amy's emotional needs over his wife's need for reassurance and answers. I spent the night alone, wondering whether my husband was comforting his secret baby mama or planning their next moves in covering up their affair and the true paternity of Amy's children. The aftermath of yesterday's confrontation has left me feeling more isolated and uncertain than ever before in my marriage. Luke returned home this morning claiming that Amy needed emotional support after being falsely accused of deception and betrayal, but his willingness to prioritize her needs over my concerns has only deepened my suspicions. Luke is now asking me to drop the entire investigation and trust his word that he has never been unfaithful to me, and that Amy's children are not his biological offspring. He says that continuing to pursue these suspicions will destroy both families and create lasting damage to relationships that have been built over decades. But his request for blind trust comes after 15 years of potential deception, and a confrontation where neither he nor Amy provided convincing evidence of their innocence. Their coordinated defensive responses and Amy's refusal to allow DNA testing have only strengthened my conviction that they are hiding something catastrophic. The most devastating aspect of this situation is the realization that I may never get definitive answers about Luke's relationship with Amy or the paternity of her children. Without Amy's cooperation for DNA testing, I am left with suspicions that cannot be proven or disproven through scientific evidence. This uncertainty is particularly torture because it affects my ability to protect Sophie from potential accidental incest with Tom.I. If my suspicions are correct, they are half-siblings who have been developing romantic feelings for each other without knowing they share a father. Luke has promised to have serious conversations with Tom about the inappropriateness of romantic relationships with Sophie, but his willingness to intervene suggests that he also has concerns about their potential biological connection. My mother-in-law Kat's revelation that she has harbored similar suspicions for years has provided some validation for my concerns, but it has also made me realize that this potential deception has been obvious to multiple family members who chose to remain silent rather than seeking the truth. Kat told me that she has always treated Amy's children as her grandchildren, partly because she suspected that Luke might be their biological father. She said that she and her husband have had arguments about this possibility for years, with him refusing to consider the idea while she found the evidence increasingly convincing. The fact that Luke's own mother has wondered about his paternity of Amy's children suggests that my suspicions are not the product of paranoid imagination or marital jealousy, but rather reasonable concerns based on observable evidence. However, Kat also warned me that pursuing DNA testing could destroy family relationships, even if the results prove Luke's innocence. She said that some secrets are better left unexamined, because the process of investigation can be more damaging than the truth itself. But I cannot accept this philosophy when it comes to protecting Sophie from potential accidental incest. The risk of allowing half-siblings to pursue romantic relationships is too serious to ignore based on concerns about family harmony or relationship preservation. I have been researching legal options for compelling DNA testing when one party refuses to cooperate, but the laws in our jurisdiction make it extremely difficult to force paternity testing without the cooperation of both parents and the children involved. Luke could theoretically petition the court for paternity testing, but doing so would require him to claim that he believed Amy's children might be his biological offspring. Since he maintains that he has never been sexually involved with Amy, he would not be willing to make such a legal claim. The legal system is designed to protect children from unnecessary testing and family disruption, which means that my suspicions alone are not sufficient grounds for court-ordered DNA testing. I'm essentially trapped in a situation where I cannot get the answers I need to protect my daughter from potential genetic catastrophe. But I also cannot ignore the mounting evidence that suggests my husband has been deceiving me about his relationship with his best friend. The stress of this uncertainty is affecting every aspect of my life and my relationships with family members. I find myself analyzing every interaction between Luke and Amy for evidence of deception or romantic connection. I have been reviewing years of family photographs looking for additional evidence of physical resemblances between Luke and Amy's children. I have been questioning memories of past events and conversations for signs that I missed obvious clues about their relationship. This obsessive investigation is consuming my mental and emotional energy while providing no definitive answers or resolution to my concern. I feel like I am trapped in a nightmare where the truth is just out of reach, but the consequences of ignorance could be devastating. Sophie has been asking questions about why I seem so stressed and distracted lately, but I cannot explain my concerns without potentially destroying her relationship with her father or creating anxiety about her romantic feelings for Tom. I have been trying to discourage her interest in Tom without providing specific explanations, but she is becoming resistant to my guidance and more determined to pursue the relationship despite my obvious disapproval. The situation is becoming more urgent as Sophie and Tom grow older and their romantic feelings intensify. I cannot prevent them from spending time together without creating family conflict and suspicion about my motivations. Luke has been trying to act normally and maintain our usual family routines, but I can see that he is also stressed and concerned about the investigation and its potential consequences. His behavior toward me has become more attentive and affectionate, which could indicate either genuine concern about our relationship or calculated effort to prevent me from pursuing my suspicions further. I have been considering whether to share my concerns with other family members or friends who might have observed Luke and Amy's relationship over the years and could provide additional perspective or evidence. But involving more people in this investigation could create irreparable damage to family relationships if my suspicions prove to be unfounded. It could also give Luke and Amy opportunities to coordinate their responses and cover up any deception they might be maintaining. The most painful realization from this experience has been understanding that my marriage might be built on fundamental deception and betrayal that has been sustained for over 15 years. If Luke has been conducting a secret affair with Amy and fathering her children while maintaining the facade of a faithful husband and devoted family man, then everything I thought I knew about our relationship and our family has been a lie. The possibility that I have been living with a stranger who has been capable of such elaborate and sustained deception is almost too devastating to contemplate. But the alternative possibility that my suspicions are unfounded and that I am destroying my marriage and family relationships based on paranoid delusions is equally terrifying. I am trapped between these two possibilities, without any way to determine which one represents reality and which one represents the destruction of everything I value most in my life. Have you ever suspected that your partner was hiding major secrets about relationships or children? How do you handle situations where you cannot get definitive answers about potential deception? What advice would you give to someone who suspects that family members might unknowingly be related? Share your thoughts about trust, investigation, and protecting children in complex family situations in the comments below.